Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast is number 1415. The topic is Q&A, and the title is Blending Strength and Growth, Low Back Considerations. So one of my clients I'm working with, he has had a history of a hernia, had it repaired and everything, but he loved powerlifting, like strength-based training, but he didn't know how to kind of approach it with the hernia. So we've been working together for a while now. Actually, not sure. I'll have to look back up to see when we started working together. So we've been working, kind of blending those goals together. We actually started in April. So cool. Been about 4 months or so. He's seen progress, enjoys it, loves everything. So we do his nutrition, we do the training programming. He sends videos, which I really appreciate because it's probably a pain in the butt. But he's over in France, so he sends videos, and we do that through WhatsApp, which is a cool, just neat that you can do those things nowadays. So it's kind of fun. So I actually looked up his gym online and then did like a Google search to try to find different photos and stuff so I could see the type of equipment and the layout of the gym. So we could write it all out, so it would flow well for him. So really love that kind of stuff. It's kind of fun, like problem solving. So we've been working on that. Now, he's seen progress in strength. He's feeling more and more confident training, even though he has the history of the hernia. And recently, he wanted to blend in growth, so like bodybuilding, like muscle building type things. Now, we're going to be shaping the muscles to make sure everything's kind of balanced. We're going to be trying to build overall musculature, like creating more like that X frame, build width and thickness to the chest, the shoulders, the upper back, but keep the waistline thin, and then try to build out the thighs and glutes. So that way, give better aesthetic effect and get him stronger. Now, one of the things we've processed through was his squat positioning, bench positioning, deadlift positioning. Since he does like doing powerlifting and strength-based movements, I've blended that into, that was the original part of his programming, and now we've blended in bodybuilding type things. So one of the things that came up recently I thought was a neat question and a neat discussion and hopefully a neat podcast was in his journal. So all my clients, we have an online document that we use as like a journal where I'll send, diet feedback. So I track their nutrition with whatever app they're using. I'll just log into their app, look at what they're eating every day, and then give them suggestions on how to make any improvements or changes. And then they also write in questions, and I write back answers. So recently he wrote in a question. It says, "Shall I start training my low bar squat? I remember you mentioning it a few months back. I think I'd probably be stronger with it, but maybe it's not the best idea." So we had mentioned in the way he was squatting before, it's a high bar position, and it's a more upright torso. It definitely puts more of the work into the thighs, and it lessened the work in his low back and his abdominal bracing. So especially coming out of the hernia, that was a fantastic place to start. If you want to start squatting, the more upright the torso, the less stress on the hernia you have for sure. Now, as we've progressed in strength and he's feeling more and more confident with the hernia, we had thought about maybe trying out some low bar squatting because of the efficiency of low bar squatting compared to high bar squatting, just to check and see like how his body would react to it, and if he would feel stronger to continue his strength progressions, but if he would feel safe enough yet with the hernia strength. So when he wrote the question, he said, "Shall I start training my low bar?" He knew that I had mentioned it months back. Well, I've replied, I've held off on transitioning to it due to the hernia concern and with the recent adjustment to push more bodybuilding work. With bodybuilding blended into the program, I had to make changes to increase our overall volume, which is kind of the poundages moved in training, like sets times reps times the weight. And that was all in parentheses, through exercise selection. So I had to change to increase our overall volume through exercise selection. And with that comes more fatigue overall through the support and stabilization muscles, which would put the hernia more at risk if we switch to low bar. And low bar requires more low back stabilization, and I don't want to overly fatigue the low back to the point it limits our bodybuilding volume work and exercise selection options. So there's a negative effect, and this is me off my I'm rambling now, but if your low back is fatigued, it severely limits bodybuilding based exercise selection, especially depending on what equipment a person has available to them. If they're in a big commercial gym, they might have, a seated hamstring curl, a lying hamstring curl. They might have, 45-degree hyperextension bench. There might be all these other options. But if somebody doesn't have that, if they're just training at like a home gym, man, you start fatiguing that lower back, you're crushed in terms of like options. There still are options, but they're severely limited. So now back to my answer. So it's something we can revisit as we're feeling recovered and seeing progress with the current programming, but those are the reasons I held off on making the change to low bar. So then I asked him, how has your low back been feeling in training? Is it fatigued over the other muscles? Have you felt any concern or weirdness around the hernia? So when we first ever started working together, he would comment how he could feel some strain around the hernia, and we kind of had to learn what is okay strain, what is not okay strain. So the client's well aware of kind of what is like good pain versus bad pain, or like, hey, like some warning lights are going off kind of thing. So I wanted to get his feedback, with the training having changed to blending in muscle growth components with strength. I'm going to take my best guess. It's a pretty damn good guess, but I'm going to take my best guess at what would be a good balance for us with all that. And then I want to hear the client's feedbacks, so that way, I can modify it, make changes, and keep personalizing everything. But that is a discussion I thought would be interesting to hear, that when you're trying to blend strength and muscle growth into the same program, there are considerations when it comes to lower back. Now, for this client, it's even more magnified because of the hernia concern. So once his lower back's fatigued, you're going to have a lot more stress being absorbed by the other muscles to try to make up for the low back fatigue. And one of the other muscles would be the abdomen, and we don't want to do that because we have, concern about trying to strengthen everything around the hernia. Now, for people without hernias, you still want to be careful to not overtrain your lower back, because you would start to notice your strength progression slow down or actually reverse, and your lower back just hurts, after every workout, and it's stiff between workouts, and you can't bend over, you can't do other things outside of the gym, and then all of a sudden your quality of life is kind of trash, and you would lose motivation to do the programming, and you might think that, you can't blend strength and muscle building together. Yeah, you can. It's just trying to do it in the right way. So there were podcasts, just kind of 3 areas of topic that I thought would be interesting to discuss when I consider blending together strength and bodybuilding effects into the same programming. One of the main things we actually covered in podcast number 82. So way back when. Now, if you have trouble accessing old podcasts, if you go to our Podbean page, I think it's like HTTP, whatever that semicolon or whatever the colon thing, / and then it's brutalirongym.podbean.com. I think it's something like that. If you go to our Podbean page, so just even in Google, you can just type Brutal Iron Gym Podbean, P-O-D, Pod, Bean, B-E-A-N, Podbean. And on that page, you'll see kind of like our home page and most recent episode. If you look on the right side of the screen, about the middle of the page, you'll see a search kind of bar. You can just type in any term, and it'll show you all the podcasts that have that term in it. So you could type collateral damage concerns, and it'll only show you one because we only use that title one time. But that's a good way to access that. So you can check that out if you want to. Podcast 82, it is titled Collateral Damage Concerns. And what this refers to is if I'm doing exercises, let's say I want to do barbell bent over rows into pull-ups. That sounds like a pretty wicked, awesome combination for your back, right? So barbell bent over rows into pull-ups. What you'd think would be nice is, barbell bent over rows kind of work the lats at more of like a front to back kind of plane of the body, like push-pull kind of plane. Yes. So I'm trying to not get too lost. So the angles are different. Let's just go with that. So bent over rows, it works the lats in kind of like a rowing position, whereas a pull-up works the lats kind of like perpendicular, parallel with your body. So it works the lats in more of like a pull-up, pull-down position. So you get both of the movements work your lats. Barbell bent over rows, you're like, okay, well, that might strain my lower back, but pull-ups does not. So that's great. So I can go from a movement that works my back, but also does target my lower back. But if I go right to pull-ups, I still get to work my back, but I don't have to worry about the lower back. So you're like, okay, that would be a great pairing. One downside is you're going to have trouble with grip. Now, yes, you can use wrist straps, so that was great. Great correction. Thank you for throwing that out there. And that is what I would suggest. So at least one of the movements, or if not both, you want to use wrist straps to help your grip. So what you would find is the barbell bent over rows, you may be able to row as much as your back can manage even without your grip being aided. But as soon as you go to do the pull-ups, your grip is so fatigued from the barbell bent over rows that you might fail the pull-ups because you can't hold on to the pull-up bar anymore, not because the back is fatigued. So the collateral damage concern of doing barbell bent over rows into pull-ups, great exercise pairing, but the concern would be your grip. So you can use wrist straps to kind of aid that and lessen the concern there. Pretty cool. Now, like I had another training partner way back in the day, he used to like to do, we would do our deadlift workout. So we'd do all the conventional deadlifts we could do that day. And then while we were stripping the bar down, he liked to do barbell bent over rows. So if we got up to, like, say, 4 plates, we would take a plate off each side and we would do, a set of barbell bent over rows. Then we go to 2 plates, set of barbell bent over rows. Then 1 plate, a set of barbell bent over rows. The worst part was your freaking lower back. So your lower back was so fatigued from the conventional deadlifts that trying to stay in kind of like a mid-range conventional deadlift position to do the barbell bent over rows, it couldn't even feel my upper back. All I felt was my lower back trying to blow up. Now, it actually did help us be stronger in deadlifts because it just pushed the development and growth of the lower back. But it didn't do much for our upper back. So it's kind of like, well, what are we doing it for? Are we doing it to build our deadlift, or are we doing it to try to build our upper back while we just tear the weights down from the deadlift? And that would be a collateral damage concern. Example is, okay, doing barbell bent over rows after deadlifts sounds like it makes sense. The weight's already on the bar. Why not? But the concern is that you're going to fatigue the hell out of your lower back. And now your lower back's sore and tired, and it might take 3, 4, 5 days to fully, to be able to be used again. But yet you want to squat in 3 days. But so then all of a sudden when you squat, your lower back's fatigued. You start having a little bit of a hip pain because all the other muscles are trying to make up for the lower back. You're moving a little funky. Everything's a little stiff. And then all of a sudden in 2 weeks, you have this weird hip pain that won't go away. And it started because of doing the barbell bent over rows right after deadlifts. So these are things that are worth considering because they have effect either in the workout themselves. Maybe I can't do barbell bent over rows right after deadlifts very well. So that's a negative effect. But it also has building effects, negative effects. Whereas all of a sudden in 2 or 3 weeks, you start having this random pain. And it's actually from what you did 2 or 3 weeks ago. So that's something that I would look at when I'm looking at his programming. Okay, if I want to blend in bodybuilding work, I do have to do more overall volume because volume kind of pushes tissue growth. Now, in the exercises that I would choose to do overall volume with, I want to make sure I don't accidentally annoy the crap out of other muscles that I need. So, for example, one of the things I've used in cases like this before is I might have the person, before they squat, they might do machine leg extensions and machine leg curls. The benefit of that is you're pre-exhausting, and I'm going to explain that here in a second. You're pre-exhausting, you're kind of pre-damaging the thigh tissues. But you're not stressing the knee joint, the hip joint. You're not wearing out the lower back, the obliques, the abdominal muscles. You're not really messing around with the upper back, the shoulders. So there's really no or very little collateral damage concern doing leg extensions and leg curls before you squat. Now, why would I do that? Is there's 3 podcasts you can learn more about. Is podcast 254. It's a training podcast titled Pre-Exhaust for Big Gains Without Big Pains. Pretty good title there. So 254 explains pre-exhaust and how you can use it to get bigger muscles, but to lessen joint pain. Podcast 334 is a training podcast titled Priming versus Pre-Exhaust. So there's kind of different intensities in which you would do isolation work before big compound movements. And that podcast 334 will explain the difference there. And then podcast 102 is a training podcast titled 3 Ways to Progress in Strength. So these 3 podcasts kind of feed into how we're modifying his program to where we're going to be doing isolations like leg extensions, leg curls, or very friendly joint movements, but isolated to work singular tissues before we would do a big compound movement like a squat or a deadlift or a bench press. So the reason why we would train, like, say, the thigh muscles, the quadriceps, the hamstrings before we squat, is then when you go to squat, it creates more muscle damage in those specific tissues because they've already been damaged before you got to the squat. So they're going to be damaged even more by the squat, but you haven't pre-damaged other muscles like low back, obliques, abdomen. You haven't pre-damaged or pre-annoyed the joints, the knees, the hips, the low back, the shoulders. So you can push squats harder into failure within the muscles that you pre-fatigue or pre-exhaust. So if I do leg extensions before I squat, squats are going to create more quad damage than they normally would. Therefore, they turn into more of a quad growth exercise than they normally would. But if I do lying hamstring curls or seated hamstring curls before I squat, all of a sudden squats create more damage in the hamstrings than they normally would, and therefore they become a hamstring kind of building exercise. So it's actually kind of neat because you can change what you do before a big movement to get different results from the big movement, even though you never change anything. So, how I would squat for quads versus how I'd squat for hamstrings would be the exact same. Yeah, I can just change what I do before I get to the squats. And this is how we blend his programming in to where I can get that muscle growth aspect that he wants without any kind of joint annoyance or decreasing in his kind of quality of performance within his squats. Now, does pre-exhausting his thighs bring his strength levels down momentarily in that workout for squats? Yes, they do. But it's important to recognize that when we try to get stronger in the gym, it's not actually kind of like how much weight I'm using that matters as much as the perception of the weight I'm using. Our body needs to feel stressed, and then it responds to stress. It doesn't matter whether I use 200 pounds or 400 pounds. It matters how hard those pounds feel. So if somebody can squat 800 pounds and they're only squatting 400, that's an easy workout to them. If somebody can only squat 300 pounds and they're squatting 300, that's a freaking miserable workout for them, right? And the person squatting 300, if their max is 300, they're going to get way more of a strength response than the person who can squat 800 pounds but is only squatting 400 pounds in their workout. That's more like just practicing technique for them. It's not going to get much of a strength response. So the perception of the weight load is what creates or signals adaptation demands by the body, not the actual poundage that we use. We measure our progress by poundage that we use, but we don't make progress by the poundage we use. It's a very weird phrase, but think that through. It's more so the perception of how weights feel that elicit the body to make a response to it. So if something feels awfully heavy and my body's like, oh my gosh, if you ever do that again, I might die. So it's going to go, well, I might as well make my muscles stronger so that way I don't die in case we ever do this again. So we want to stimulate an adaptation response in training. That has happened by how weights feel, not technically by how heavy they actually are. So this is kind of interesting, and that's why I mentioned podcast 102. It's a training podcast, again, titled 3 Ways to Progress in Strength. And it talks about how we can make strength increases by physical strength adaptations, which is kind of what we're talking about so far. If I get tissue stronger, then I get stronger. Duh. You can also get stronger by increasing your technique. So quality or performance or, ability. If you are more technically sound in a lift, like technically efficient, then you can display your strength better. So even though his legs might be pre-fatigued from the leg extensions, leg curls, he can still improve his technique, and that'll allow him to continue to express his strength better. The third way is mental strength. Sometimes when we try to go lift heavy things, we kind of psych ourselves up. We get super nervous. We are afraid of screwing up. So all of a sudden we forget all of our cues and we actually do screw up. So those are 3 ways that we can progress in strength. Physical adaptation. Then we have technical improvement. And then we have just kind of like mindset and mental strength. So even if I pre-exhaust his thighs in the workout, he can still progress in all three of those ways. So it's pretty cool. Then the last thing we'll kind of talk about is podcast number 966 is a training podcast. It's titled Programming Concepts, Weight Load Selection, and Recovery Effects. Another podcast that goes with it is podcast 820. It's a training podcast titled Eccentric Loading Effects on Recovery Needs. And then the third one is podcast 322 is a training podcast titled Training Frequency and Recovery Differences per Goal. Now, why did I lump all these together? Is they'll also factor into whether I want to do a low bar or stay with high bar for this client. And this all stuff affects, every client's programming, because everything I write for everybody is all, unique to them. So the concepts here is, if we look at the first one, like weight load selection and recovery effects, it is the heavier lifts the person does, the more time they need to recover, right? But we said in podcast 322, which is titled Training Frequency and Recovery Differences per Goal, different goals require different frequency of training. So strength, like adaptations, neurological adaptations to improve strength, you can train that roughly every 5 to 7 days. And there's a million ways to get around that. But in general, you would do heavy like squats every 5 to 7 days. If you try to do it more frequent than that, you're probably not going to get much of a progression unless you're improving technique or your mindset. But you're not going to make a lot of physical adaptations within a shorter time frame. But if you wait longer than 7 days, it kind of like, it's not in frequency enough of a stimulus that you're just going to get slow results. So it's just going to take longer than it really needs to. So strength, usually 5 to 7 days is a pretty good rate of training. However, muscle tissue growth, muscle tissue development, you can train every 2 to 4 days. So what's interesting here is the heavier I load this person on their squats, the more time they need between squatting and the more accumulation damage within the joints that they would have in the ends of the tissues that they would have, like the connective parts around the joints. They're going to have more strain and wear and tear around their joints. So they're not going to be able to train as frequently as the muscle development goal would require. So muscle development is every 2 to 4 days. Strength development is 5 to 7. So one of the ways to kind of blend these better is to reduce the weight load that the person can possibly do on squats. That reduces the recovery rate that they need between their squatting workouts, which allows me to have them train at a higher frequency, which matches the muscular development goals. So if I keep him at high bar and I pre-exhaust his thighs before his squats are perceived to be heavy enough to produce strength development, but it's not actually heavy enough because of the limitations to the weight load that we can actually train more frequently enough to get the leg development that we want for muscular growth. I don't know if that was too much, but the fun part of all of this is if we understand how to manipulate each element, it impacts the other elements and you can blend this stuff together. So these are pretty cool. I know I named like 7 podcasts, and that can be a lot to listen to because some of these things are like 20, 30 minutes. So I think I just gave you like 3 or 4 hours worth of stuff to listen to. But if you were to understand and kind of take your time and learn the things in these 7 podcasts, it would be pretty cool because then you could see, okay, I can understand why Rob, how he could blend strength and muscle development, but also be like safe to the hernia concern. Also match this client's training schedule, and this client also runs, by the way, so I have to factor that into damage. And then the client's nutrition, and they eat about 3 times a day. That's the way their schedule is best kind of structured. So how many calories and how much recovery am I going to get in 3 meals? I have to also factor in the demands of running. I have to factor in the hernia. I have to factor in that they want both strength and muscle growth. So there's a lot to blend here. But this is why I love this stuff. Because it is freaking awesome to try to write a program that does all this. It keeps my brain busy, basically. So I like it. But I hope that if you do check out some of these podcasts, that you can start to kind of learn more how to fine-tune your programming to start to get more of what you want and less of what you don't. So you don't have the annoying elbow pain or hip pain or lower back's not so fatigued. How you can blend both strength and growth together. You might think you're not able to, but you actually are. And how you can match your recovery needs to your schedule and the blend of two different goals. So really cool stuff. So I hope this was interesting. I love it. But if you have any follow-up questions or you want to know anything else about kind of related to this, just shoot me an email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. I love this stuff. I'm happy to help all the time. So don't ever hesitate. Just send the email. I try to answer back to everybody within a week as best as I can. So thank you to everybody who does send in emails. I enjoy it, and it's fun hearing from everyone. It's just really cool to see where all the listeners are from, not only throughout the United States, but all other countries. Like we've actually reached over 100 countries now. So it's really cool to kind of hear from and talk to people in different cultures and see kind of what their concerns are and what they're dealing with. So really cool. Okay, well, thank you very much for listening. If you like our podcast, please consider sharing it. The more people we share the podcast with, the more people the podcast can help. So that's the whole goal. So if the podcast has been helpful to your life, please consider sharing it. Also, please consider donating. The podcast is over $1,000 a year for hosting costs. I give an hour to it every single day, and I want to keep it for free. And it's only thanks to the financial donations that makes any sense whatsoever business-wise. So thank you very much. You can consider donating at our website, www.brutalirongym.com. There's an option for a one-time donation, monthly donation, yearly donation. Anything that you give is greatly appreciated. We all appreciate it, so we all have something to listen to. Also, thank you. If you like the information that we share in our podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube under the name Brutal Iron Gym. If you have any questions, feedback, suggestions, anything you want to know, let us know at our email at brutalirongym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.